I am so glad for this opportunity. And we're going to be talking near the end of this. I want to commend people for staying on for this much about GA4. And I hope to add some new information this afternoon or this morning around BigQuery. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So the thing that we want to remember before we talk about the technology is why marketers are trying to improve how they run their programs. So simply put, make sure I've got my advancing here. Simply put, it's because we know that it's costly to find new customers. And I'm showing charts that I'm sometimes used to seeing from finance people. And these charts begin off with a large bar of revenue, and then we take away slices as we have different cost components. And you can imagine this for a particular product, one unit of your product, or as a whole company. But the point is that you can't take away more revenue than you have. And when our marketing is fuzzy and we don't have an idea of exactly what we're spending on it, we are sometimes on an individual basis, finding that we would actually be eroding and demolishing all profit. If we can get that cost to be predictable, then we should be able to preserve profit. And that's, of course, what everybody wants to do. So we're all on board with that, right? There's only one problem. It's a lot of math. And in particularly B2B, or if you're in direct to consumer and there is a high ticket item, what we have to do is we have to break down what the value of the interactions are that make their way down to a final transaction. That's, we all know, for example, in this example at the bottom line, when we won a piece of business, if it was worth $1,000 as a unit, in revenue and our cost was $300. Okay, that's fine and good. $700 gross profit. But there's other stages that we need to look at, because in the worlds of sales and marketing, we're working up in the leads, or in the number of engaged visitors, or indeed in the number of strangers that we're reaching with impressions. So that has to be practicable math too. And that's not easy to do. Why not? Well, I would say it's because our systems are not built that way. We have systems that go horizontally, but the performance that we need to look at when we're trying to construct that picture of what getting a new piece of revenue entails, it goes vertically. Now, there's one helpful piece in here though, and GA4, which is right there on the visitors band, is going to be a key, I contend, for how we fix this. We need to keep in mind that the folks who made Google Analytics 4 are working to basically make marketing go much farther than before. And they commissioned the Boston Consulting Group to do a study. And Boston Consulting Group said, according to how marketing should be done, the tools should enable us to move from nascent use of analytics in our marketing to emerging use, to connected use, and to multi-moment use. Now, I'm sad to say that if we look around at the average organization, probably more in the small to mid-sized category, we're going to find that most come fit over into that emergent or even in that nascent category. What I'm here to try and tell you today, though, is that I believe that there's something that can vault you forward on this maturity curve, and that tool is free. And it's Google Analytics 4. No, they don't pay me to say that, but listen to me and I'll tell you why I think that is. First off, I have to dispel in your mind what I'm talking about. I'm largely not talking about the GA4 that is pictured atop here. That's an interface. That's the place where we can, go to crank out a report. I'm talking about the other side of GA4, which exports data into Google Cloud, and one of the jewels in the crown of Google Cloud called BigQuery. So I've tried to think of a way to represent how that data works and actually how I think the Google engineers wanted this and tried to develop it. To me, I think it resembles an iceberg. I think that Google considered GA4 to be a piece of something much larger. Now, we, outside of Google, are only able to see stuff above the waterline. To us, I believe, it's presented as an independent standalone product. But for anybody who runs, for example, Google Ads, we know that Google Analytics is not a standalone product. There's too many tight integrations for it to be that. And I will say, for those of you who have that experience, I want you to think of BigQuery and Google Cloud as being the same way. They have a lot of tight integrations, and they have a lot of things that seemed to be purpose-built and ready to use with GA4. So, but let's demystify what BigQuery is. That's the core part of what we're going to talk about today. Well, I'm going to go back to maybe one of my favorite movies. If you remember the movie Indiana Jones, we had the very last scene, and the very last scene finishes in a warehouse. And of course, that warehouse is where something very famous went to go and get lost. However, I would say we should think of a data warehouse as being a big place, in this case with BigQuery, where information is put, but that information can be brought out and it can be found in lightning fashion. And it's doing that with tools that have been in the IT field for a very long time. And I'm using this screen grab from an old Windows OS I had to show just how long ago we had this thing that talks to BigQuery and gets that data out. And it's called SQL, or Structured Query Language. So these are very well-worn tools. The type of information, though, that we are putting into them is new for many of us. It's this type of information about our web visitors. And if we can bypass the interface and think of going over into BigQuery to get our information, there will be some payoffs. So for those of you who wanted to have some concrete steps here, I'm going to whistle through what it can take to get ourselves onto BigQuery. It's not a lot of work within, well, if you've already got GA4 installed, you could be looking at BigQuery data tomorrow from your GA instance. How do you do that? Well, it's a combination of, you have to go over to Google Cloud, which is cloud.google.com. You create a free account. You should think about some of the administration of it, because this is going to be something that is going to hold first-party data. And we all know how important that is becoming in our organizations. So as you set this up, think of talking to the other people who are responsible for being the custodian of your privacy policy. Also, think about the finance people, because there are sometimes other Google products which will have been set up through a Google Cloud billing account. And you may either hook onto them, or you may, for your own reasons, want to be on a separate one. There are charges for Google Cloud, just as there are with any cloud service. But I would say most of the people listening to this will be talking about a minuscule amount of monthly charge, because they give you a whole bunch of credit every month, and your usage is usually completely covered by that. So if we think about, where the data is going to sit, who's going to have access to it, then we can get into exporting our Google Analytics data. We pop into the admin section of our Google Analytics 4. We go down to this thing called BigQuery. We start the setup. And the only other question that we're going to need to answer at this point, again, privacy related, is which region of the world we are going to be hosting this data in, like where the physical server is located. Please take good care as you are going through your setup that you select the one that's appropriate for you. So we set up Google Analytics 4, and as I said, we wait overnight. The data appears the next day, and we're set up. This goes as well for Google Ads. You can take Google Ads data and toss it into BigQuery. It even recently became possible to do with Google Search Console. But Glenn, I get asked, I'm looking for data on my Microsoft ads. I'm looking for data that's coming from an internal system like my marketing automation, my CRM, my HubSpot, my Pardot, Marketo. Well, I got good news and bad news for you. Those can be done. They can also and should be putting data into BigQuery. A simple way that you can do that is to have your own ETL provider. Some of those that you've probably heard of are Fivetran or Stitch Data, Funnel.io, Hevo Data, Supermetrics. There's a bunch of them. And they are there to basically handle the application programming interfaces, the APIs, and they'll just make your data show up as it needs to as soon as they have been properly handshaken with the Google Cloud account. And then voila, your data shows up. So what do we get once we're in there? Well, I wanted to show you a screen grab, and this may be underwhelming for some, but this is their setup within the BigQuery section of Google Cloud. I'll just navigate it for you. We start over on the left-hand side. We are looking at a whole slew of data sources that we have. Within one of those data sets, we are looking at it and we're starting to understand in that middle column what we've done with it, where it's hosted, how much information is sitting in there. BigQuery can handle petabytes worth of information. So we have no worries there, but we do want to watch how much we're using. And then finally, I mentioned SQL before. In the right-hand column here, we have a SQL statement that is saying, hey, add stats 81840467225. I want to know all the information that you have where, and in this case, we're looking for something that we want all the rows where there was at least one click, and off it goes and gets the results for us. Okay. As I said, perhaps underwhelming, because that's not the most likely way we're going to use this as marketers. If there's a, database administrator listening, this is where they're going to stay happy. But I really want us to focus on the power that becomes possible once we say, I can pull any information out from any data source which can answer my business questions. We do have to reckon with the fact that there are probably some new concepts and new perhaps programming skills that we may need on our team, or we need to outsource, or we need to teach ourselves. So just present those there. But moving on to how this might look once we've got it all put together, we have this large cylinder in the middle. That's going to be our BigQuery, and BigQuery is bringing all this data in. Like I said, things like Google Analytics and GA4, they're touching directly into BigQuery. Every night, if you want, you can have that day's data dumped into BigQuery. As I said, for the other non-Google products, we can also have those in via ETL services. So all roads lead to BigQuery. All the data gets put in there. And I want you to remember back to what I said at the beginning, where I showed that series of horizontal parts of our stack. Those tiers, if we think about how our data is being collected, and for example, if we're sharing information from one source to another. So for example, if we're using Microsoft advertising or Facebook advertising or Twitter or LinkedIn, that we are adding UTM parameters onto our URLs. When people click them, that information is being fed into Google Analytics to tell it exactly where it came from. If that information is being fed into BigQuery, then we've kind of arrived at that place where we can look vertically at our data and we're not siloed into those horizontal containers anymore. And what can we do with that? Well, we can make dashboards. There's another product here for that. It's called Looker Studio. You probably know it better as Google Data Studio. And I'll just leave a list here for you. This is only a partial list of ones that we've seen put together. But let me sum it up by saying, if you can analyze something, like if you actually, within the systems that you've got tied to BigQuery, tell a data story, you can visualize that data story with Looker Studio. It's very portable. It allows you to send either PDFs or live interactive dashboards that you can send around your company, let people start interacting with it. They're like reports on steroids. To give you just a quick idea, and I have to redact some of this information from a client, but you can start to show all sorts of instantly refreshed charts and graphs about your marketing information, your marketing performance, how it's doing, what's not working for you, how things are distributed, are they on plan or off plan? All of this is really simple with Looker Studio. Another one, as I said before, when you put together the data in the right way, you can start to look across and you can say, well, I've got money that I spend on social ads. I got money I've spent on search ads. I'm not really concerned about, what those tools, I can go into those tools themselves and find out how much they tell me that they're bringing back in ROI. But I want to look across. I want to say, did the first ad that I ran, did that get me better conversion rates on LinkedIn, or did it do better for me on Google? And you can start to match things across and say, well, where should my next dollar go? Now you can start to see how your imagination becomes your guide for what you're going to dashboard. You aren't limited the way that you would be by the traditional platforms. One small proviso here, when we start to talk about this, we are, of course, getting into attribution. And attribution, to me, it kind of reminds me of like this little test track. What a tool is going to tell you it achieved is a function of the information that that tool has access to. So if I have, for example, Google working on their own little racetrack here, and they tell me that one Google click resulted in a sale that I made, that's great. However, I got to keep in mind that if I hadn't fed into it the fact that I had LinkedIn or Microsoft or Facebook activity with that same individual, then it's not going to know that, oh, it was one of several touches that we had. So you got to be careful of that with the data. Those other pieces of information, if they're not kept in the loop, pardon the pun, then the tool that you're using will tell you only what it does on its own closed track. Another thing that can come into it is the status of when we're getting these conversions. So as I said, that information of getting back into a channel, whether it made a sale or not, that is information that we have to feed back, even though it goes against the flow of where our user is going. So you'll want to start to look at things, for example, in the Google world, like a GCLID, or if you have somebody coming into your SaaS tool, for example, you have a user ID, and you can start to feed back these non-personally identifying pieces of information to the platform. Or if you're talking non-Google, you have a couple of others that you need to determine how to use. This is a really, really good way to get a straightforward, I'll call it, it's a next step. It's maybe to the connected step that we are getting on our maturity curve. But if we're really going to kick this into high gear, we need to consider the deeper signals that these ad platforms are starting to use. And this is where BigQuery excels. Why do those tools need deeper signals? Well, basically, an individual conversion, that information only gets you so far. The ad platforms are not looking at the historicals so much. They're basing historicals, but they're also trying to do forward looking. And that involves massive quantities of data, including data we don't have. We as marketers, if we don't tie into these, the problem is we're giving these aggregate, systems just little tidbits here and there, little sparks that they're seeing, but they're not actually understanding which audiences are valuable to them, which individuals are valuable to them, and which are not. And without that, their spending is going to be rather unrestrained and not as intelligent as artificial intelligence would suggest it should be. So what we do is we think about what kind of answers ultimately need to happen. What information do we have, or can we feed into this that will answer questions like what best predicts audience behavior? Which people would have the highest propensity if we showed them an ad to buy? Which people, on the other hand, would have the highest propensity of buying even if we didn't show them an ad? And of course, depending on whether I want to include or exclude these audiences, where can I find more of them? Google is pressing hard into this area. For those of you who thought that they're still only working on things like keywords, I would suggest that you go and talk to people who have been working in the Google Ads space in the last several years, and that you bring your thinking more up to date and understand how the kind of information in BigQuery can feed into today's modern ad platforms. Once we feed them information, what are they doing with it? They're making predictions. And this is going to be what actually gets better over time once they have a feedback loop to tell them if they're actually getting better or not. You may have heard in AI, we call this training the model. And the devices inside of it, inside of Google Cloud that are used for it, there's one called BigQuery ML. There's another one called Vertex. There are other tools that are semi-Google supported, like CRM Int. These all work to massage the information that we have about our audiences in order to bring them up to the tools where they influence bidding. I'm going to remind you one more time, though, that these tools, like Google Ads, will also be favoring their own information. So Google Ads, of course, is thinking that you simply need to send information back to Google Ads. You may want to maybe instead give them some audiences, for example, that they need to exclude. Maybe if you sell something once a year to someone, you should exclude from Google. I don't look for people who have just recently bought something like I had, because they're going to have a whole year of using it before it comes out up for renewal. So you have to work, whether it's Google or with other platforms, you have to be responsible for knowing whether you're going into their territory or into another realm. So to revisit our diagram here, as I said, all roads lead into BigQuery. Well, they also lead out of BigQuery to things like our ad platforms at Google, and then our non-Google ad platforms. As we wrap up, I want you to think about a couple of strategies. If you need to have universal analytics data, you should consider exporting that as well into BigQuery. Why? Because for most companies, they want to see month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year periods to understand trends. So bringing that data in, merging it, and reporting in BigQuery is a lot easier than trying to do it in another tool. Also, it depends on when you set up GA4 for collecting data. So if you do long period over period reporting and you've only just started collecting data on GA4 in the last few months, you will need this UA information to bridge beyond July 1st of 2023 until such time as all of the data in your trend reporting is on GA4. I mentioned earlier about IDs. I did want to reinforce that you need to start thinking about how you're passing information. They could be individual or even just that relates to how your marketing process works. If you have a workflow that puts the completion of a certain conversion form into your marketing automation system, and that system sends out a specific sequence for people who filled out that form, you need to send information inside and sometimes as a hidden field outside that form that will later on be helpful to you to couple so that you can understand when I did these things, it resulted in these conversions and I had those sequences, and here's how they impacted my overall client acquisition cost. Remember, we're going to try and bring it back to cost to get our full end-to-end funnel picture. And I can't finish my talk without perhaps suggesting a few things that you might want to read. I've got great books here that I can wholeheartedly endorse from the likes of Mark Edmondson, Christopher Penn, and Mark Loban and Alex Yastrobensky. And I've even included a little bonus one there if you haven't read those. And full disclosure, I've interviewed the guests of some of these books on the podcast. As I wrap and thank you, I want to give you a chance to maybe digest what I've talked about again. And there's an audio version of a lot of what I've just talked about. And I've got the link for it there on the Funnel Reboot podcast. As well, I will make the slides available if you just go to that GA Fast Forward, emphasis on the fast, website, and that'll be available for you shortly so that you can get another chance to look through this. But my final thought with you is that I want you to start trying new things. Don't be afraid. You're not going to break anything. This is a chance for you to perhaps live up to the things that you've always wanted to do in marketing. And I want to wish you the best as you do it.
Great. Thanks for that, Glenn. I've just posted a link to the GA sort of fast forward domain in chat. I didn't quite capture the other link. It's a little bit long to type out, so I'll have to add that in a moment. I'm just checking, see if we've got any questions. What we can do, we can actually see if we can promote someone to the stage if they want to sort of raise their hand and ask you a question directly, Glenn. So if you do, there should be on Zoom, there's a little raise hand button, or someone actually, Joel has just asked, what does CRM int do?
Yes, thank you, Joel. So CRM int is one of those things that's a blessing to non-technical people like me to use the machine learning capabilities within Google Cloud. You must use the components of Google Cloud that are required. And as I said, it is a very permission-based and a very component-based suite. CRM int basically allows me to run a whole series of installation of all of the libraries that are needed, as well as some of the scripts. And it takes me through in a wizard type fashion to telling it, okay, it's looking for a GA4 data source. Well, here is my GA4 data source. And so that little variable gets dropped into the script, and what CRM ends up with is it gives me a couple of files, which once I deploy them, what happens behind the scenes is that all of that information is fed into Google Cloud. Google Cloud implements some routines. When it executes those routines, it tells Google Analytics 4 what my audience, all of my audience that's ever been on my website that GA4 knows about, what they are rated as far as their propensity around, for example, will they buy if they see a new ad? And so what you end up with is our audiences that are by quintiles. So from the top 20% to the bottom 20%. And then I can go and turn those into audiences that I use in Google Ads.
That's great. We've got another question from Lacey. I'll just read this one out. Hi, Glenn. I'm currently working with clients to set up data warehouses, and most want to use their own data warehouse. However, what I'm understanding is that it's critical to use BigQuery for many reasons, but one reason is the predictive measurement and forecasting, and how critical will it be regarding the loss of cookies? Can you provide more information on this? So I think what Lacey is asking is, because I know there's a consent mode modeling within GA4. I guess, does that flow into BigQuery, and thus, that upscaling bit, I'm assuming.
Yes. Yeah. So I'll bring back my, visualize that Lion King slide that I showed again, where, there is bounty and, beauty, and there's dew on the leaves in this, nice place where Google has arranged all the information. And I have to admit that they are not making it easy for non-Google information or non-Google clouds to host this information. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but if we think about the tight integration that I described when I show the iceberg, it might be worth piloting first how well the Google tools on a Google Cloud server are able to do for you, and then let the decision makers, once they've seen that performance, consider whether or not performing that well on another cloud platform is possible or desirable.
Okay, sounds a bit like kind of a test the water and see. I'm just looking at if anyone's got any questions, or if anyone wants to be promoted to the stage, just raise your hand.
If people think of questions later, I would be more than happy on any social platform that you find me to answer them. So whether you come up with it now or later, it's not a problem. I'm happy to talk anytime.
Yeah, maybe, things like privacy and stuff, people don't like asking over, they'd rather ask you privately, so maybe that's why. I've put a link to the networking kind of party thing, so Wanda, I'm just going to jump over to, or actually just one other thing. If you can, if you you found Glenn's talk interesting and useful, it'd be great if you can fill in the speaker survey for Glenn, and if you either forgot to ask a question or want to provide feedback, that's really appreciated. And thanks for the talk, Glenn, and sharing that sort of knowledge and insight.